I sold it for $200,000. I'm off to travel abroad with Mom. We won't be home Wednesday anyway, and there's no house. Don't bother coming back.
When I returned to my parents' house, I called my husband, Tommy, who blurted out that he had sold our house. Wait a minute, what do you mean? Frantic, I got no explanation as Tommy hung up, and he wouldn't pick up my calls when I tried again. The next day, I discussed what to do next with my mom.
Don't worry, I've got it handled.
With those strong words, my mom flashed a sly grin, encouraging and puzzling me at the same time. I've got it handled. What on earth had she done? What do you mean? I asked, but my mom just muddied the waters.
You'll see.
Little did I know then, I was soon to be reunited with Tommy in a tragic state. My name is Nancy Williams. I'm currently 40 years old and have a 12-year-old daughter named Felicia who is graduating elementary school this year. I met my husband, Tommy, about 15 years ago. The connection began when Tommy, a senior colleague, transferred to my department at work. Tommy, 10 years my senior, was an impressive figure, seemingly out of reach. However, he took a liking to me, and I soon fell for him too. We started dating and quickly got married. Soon after, I discovered I was pregnant, and we were at the pinnacle of happiness. Following the birth of our daughter, I quit my job and now live happily with my family of 3 in a condo near my in-laws. Our marriage was going smoothly, but I encountered a common problem often talked about: the mother-in-law dilemma. Tommy's mom, Susie, didn't seem to think highly of me and targeted me for criticism. Interestingly, both Tommy and I were raised by single mothers, which gave us a lot in common and much to relate over. On the other hand, we had our differences. My mom always respected my decisions and stood by me. When I decided to marry Tommy, she said, "If Nancy has chosen him, I won't object. It's wonderful to be with the person you love," and she was genuinely happy for us. However, Susie was always critical from the get-go. When we announced our marriage and went to greet her, she frowned in my presence and said,
Tommy, are you sure about her? Raised by a single mom. Couldn't you find someone more decent?
Despite being a single mother herself, Susie belittled my family background, which left me agape. But at that moment, wanting to be liked by Susie, I kept smiling through her remarks. Encouraged by my acquiescence, Susie continued to criticize everything I did after we married.
Your cooking is too salty. You've added too much salt. The soup lacks proper flavor, and you can't even clean properly.
Nowadays, she would often drop by unexpectedly, devour the meal I prepared for myself, criticize it, and leave. This happens about 5 times a week. No matter that we are family, dealing with Susie's attitude wears me out. Could you ask Susie to limit her visits? I've repeatedly asked Tommy for help.
Don't talk like that. She raised me by herself, and she's lonely living alone.
Yet, Tommy always defends her. It's as if he can't see things from my perspective. But just because she's lonely, why do I have to be the one constantly criticized?
Mom's like that with everyone. She's probably just taking it out on you. Try to bear with it a bit.
Tommy said, but this was no mere petulance. He heard the words at our marriage introduction and the subsequent snide remarks. Even when our daughter Felicia was born, she laughed and said, "She's got her mother's flat nose." Susie's behavior isn't something that can be dismissed as mere affection. It's too much. Please don't come to see Felicia anymore. That was the first time I spoke back when she mentioned Felicia. But Susie just laughed at my stance.
Hey, no need to get so mad. You're so red. I can't tell who's the baby here. That's what they call a silly parent.
Tommy was there at the time, but Tommy just grinned stupidly, trying to keep Susie in a good mood without saying a word. No matter what I said afterward, it was like talking to a wall. No matter how much I resisted, it didn't reach Susie. I once tried to avoid Susie's visits by pretending not to be home. But Susie, undeterred, went through Tommy and got a key to our house. Tommy was no help, and I ended up being tormented by Susie's actions, enduring days of frustration. Now, it seems like visiting our house has become part of Susie's daily routine. If it were just that, it might be bearable, but she orders me around and makes snide comments.
You're a useless daughter-in-law. Tommy must be out of his mind to choose someone like you.
When Susie said that, Tommy went quiet. As our marriage goes on, her treatment of me only gets harsher. Furthermore, despite her initial opposition, she takes out her frustrations on Tommy for not doing exactly as she says.
Today's soup is too thin again. Marrying a wife who can't even make soup. You're really a disgraced son, Tommy.
Then don't come over if you don't like it. After all, this isn't Grandma's house.
Felicia, who has never grown close to Susie, now talks back as she's older.
Ah, not cute at all. You're just like your mom. You've been like her since you were born.
Oh, really? I'm happy to be like Mom, though.
Hearing Felicia talk back honestly feels refreshing, but because of Susie, who retorts like a child, the atmosphere at home is the worst. Eventually, Tommy started using work as an escape and stopped coming home. Then, Susie would blame me for Tommy not returning. Unable to stand it any longer, I called Tommy after his work hours were over one day. Susie's here again today. Please come home.
I'm stuck at work today. Can't do it.
Then tell Susie to go home. Such conversations aren't new. I'm always sending SOS calls to Tommy. However, Tommy never takes my concerns about Susie seriously, and that day I was heading to his office while on the phone with him.
It's just impossible. I'm working for all of us. Deal with your own mother-in-law.
Your mother, you mean? And by the way, I'm actually on my way to your company right now. Before I could finish, he hung up. I can't believe he just hung up. I was stunned and outraged by Tommy's attitude, but as if to add insult to injury, an even more unbelievable scene unfolded.
Tommy.
It was a young woman who had just left his office and was running towards Tommy. At the sight of the woman, Tommy's face broke into a disgustingly bright smile. At that moment, my heart sank into darkness. The two of them joined up, not noticing me, and began walking away as they chatted and laughed. Startled, I tried calling Tommy several times. However, Tommy glanced at his smartphone with a grimace and shoved it back into his pocket. Then they started walking towards a quieter area. While I had a bad feeling, I desperately wanted to believe Tommy, convincing myself he must be with a work colleague. Still, a 1% doubt prevented me from approaching them, and I ended up following them. Can't be. No way. I muttered to myself as I trailed them, but the outcome was grim. As expected, the two disappeared into a hotel district. I stood frozen, watching them disappear, unable to move. Tears streamed down my face as I cried all the way home. But there was no rest at home.
You're late. What have you been doing?
Susie asked, lounging on the sofa without a care. Tommy is cheating on me, I told Susie. But Susie just laughed.
Really? Tommy has got some nerve, huh? It's fine. He'll come back here eventually.
Her words infuriated me. It's because of you, Susie. You're always here, ruining the atmosphere. That's why Tommy doesn't want to come home. Perhaps it was partly an outburst, but it was the truth. Susie, clearly angered by my words, retaliated, but I managed to force her out of the house that day and cried alone in the empty room. Fortunately, Felicia was at a tutoring session and wouldn't be back for a while. I was overwhelmed with the feeling that Susie and Tommy had destroyed my family. After that incident, Susie stayed away for a while. I lacked the courage to confront Tommy about his affair, and life just went on. I was slowly regaining some peace, but every time Tommy grinned at his phone or informed me he'd be late, I felt nauseous. Since it was summer vacation, I decided to go back to my parents' house. Felicia would be home during the break. Susie would probably come by pretending nothing was wrong. So I thought it might be better to actually be away. My parents' house is in the same county, but about a 30-minute bus ride away. I couldn't visit often, but I was concerned about my mother living alone.
It's unusual for you to stay so long. You usually only stay 2 nights. Are Tommy and Susie okay with it?
My mother knew nothing about our situation. She asked casually, but I stumbled over my words.
What's wrong?
My mother must have noticed something odd about me. She looked concerned and peered into my face. Unable to keep silent, I spilled everything about what Susie had said, how Tommy had not defended me, and about his current affair. I hadn't wanted to worry her, so I had told my mother that my relationship with Susie was good, which left her speechless, but she offered warm words of comfort.
That's how it was. You can stay here until you feel settled.
I spent about a week at my parents' house, and Felicia played a lot with my mom, seeming quite content. During that time, I heard nothing from Tommy. He must be getting along well with his affair partner. I didn't care about Tommy anymore, but I couldn't leave our house empty forever. So I thought about returning home and contacted Tommy. I'm thinking of coming back next Wednesday. Tommy, who answered the phone, didn't ask how I or Felicia were doing and casually responded to my statement.
Oh, you were planning to come back?
I couldn't hide my irritation at his tone and raised my voice. What do you mean? It sounds like you don't want me back.
No, I didn't say that, but there's no house anymore.
What? Tommy's words made me forget my anger momentarily as my thoughts froze. No house? What did he mean? As I puzzled over it, Tommy blithely continued.
I sold it for $200,000. I'm going on a trip abroad with Mom, so I won't be here Wednesday anyway. There's no house. You don't need to come back.
Wait a minute, what are you talking about?
What I mean is, it's my house, and I can do what I want with it. Well, that's it.
Tommy said this and then hung up the phone, and he wouldn't answer when I called back. The trip abroad with Susie sounded dubious, but the real issue was that he sold the house. If that was true, Susie must know about it. I called Susie to ask about the house and the trip in detail.
A trip abroad? Oh, Tommy did mention something about that.
Are you really going with him? It's not with his affair partner?
I don't know. After all, you're the one who went back to your parents, leaving Tommy behind. And as for the house, it's your fault for leaving your home empty, being a housewife and all. Tommy said it, didn't he? That condo is Tommy's, so it's not your place to say anything.
Talking to Susie yielded nothing, but from her tone, it was likely the trip was with his affair partner.
You are.
Susie, having not been able to rant at me for a few days, seemed to have built up stress, and despite being on the phone, she kept complaining. I let her words go in one ear and out the other, sighed, and hung up the phone after our conversation. Upon hearing this, my mother turned pale.
That's too much.
She was visibly angry about Susie and Tommy's actions. So, I guess I'll stay here a little longer.
Of course.
It was fortunate that Felicia and I had our basic needs met, but I couldn't stay silent about Tommy selling our house. There was no way I could forgive Tommy for what he did. The next day, I discussed with my mother what I should do. I can't forgive him. I want him to regret everything he's done and reflect on it. My mother listened silently to my furious tale, then smiled mischievously.
You don't need to worry about anything, Nancy.
But I can't stand the thought of him living happily with Susie or his affair partner.
Calm down. It's okay. I've taken action. There's no way they can be happy after what they've done to you.
Her strong words encouraged me, but they also left me puzzled. In saying she took action, what could she have done? What do you mean? I asked, but my mother's response was vague.
You'll see.
2 weeks passed. Felicia and I were still living comfortably at my parents' home. Felicia seemed to really enjoy her time with her beloved grandmother, following her around every day. I worried that her last summer vacation before finishing elementary school might feel constrained, but it didn't seem to be the case. That evening, while the three of us were having dinner, my phone rang. It's an unknown number. Suspicious, I answered the call on the spot. Hello? The police. I blurted out in surprise, drawing the attention of my mother and Felicia. Without minding their gazes, the caller, who identified themselves as a police officer, explained the situation methodically.
Your husband has been found sleeping in the park, causing a disturbance to the neighbors, and he is currently being held at the police station. Could you come to pick him up?
I'll come right away. I responded and hung up. Both my mother and Felicia looked at me with wide eyes, wondering what had happened. I explained the call from the police. I have to go there now. With that, I rushed out of my parents' home. Upon arriving at the police station, I was immediately led to a room. There sat Tommy, unshaven, looking dejected, his clothes dirty, with a carry-on and an unknown woman beside him. I couldn't believe that the disheveled man being held by the police was my husband. I almost thought I was in the wrong room. Tommy looked up vacantly, and as soon as he saw me, his eyes filled with a sudden intensity, and he stood up.
What have you done, you fool?
Huh? His sudden outburst took me by surprise. To think he would speak to me like that after I came all this way when he called. Irritated, I retorted, "Who do you think you are? Causing trouble for people. What have you done? That should be my line."
Huh? Don't mess with me. You manipulated the realtor. What are you going to do about me and Kristen's place to stay?
Kristen. That must be the name of his affair partner. The unfamiliar woman remained silent, looking down. But more puzzling were Tommy's words, which left me tilting my head in confusion. A police officer calmed the agitated Tommy, giving me a moment to think. Then I remembered what my mother had said about taking care of it. In fact, my mother owned multiple properties. She became a single mother after my father passed away, who was the son of a landlord. Thus, she inherited the real estate in my father's name. Currently, these properties are transformed into apartments and are rented out. She has had a long-standing relationship with the realtors and is well known in the local real estate market.
You said he sold his home, right? I assumed it was hard to think about living with Susie, so he must be renting a new place. I just checked if Tommy had signed a recent lease on one of our properties.
I stepped out of the room where Tommy and the others were to call my mother, and she nonchalantly explained,
and it turned out he was there. Since he comes with issues, I told them, I won't rent my property to this guy. Then, other property owners caught wind of it and refused to rent to him too.
I couldn't help but laugh a little, lured by my mother's laughter. Piecing the story together, Tommy had sold our house, intending to live with Kristen, and searched for a place through a realtor. Coincidentally, the apartment they initially got was owned by my mother. Feeling secure about finding a new home, they went on a trip abroad, during which my mother refused to rent it out. The realtor tried to contact Tommy, but couldn't reach him because he was still traveling. Meanwhile, my mother, known among landlords for being exceptionally accommodating, had made it known she wouldn't rent to Tommy. No one wanted to rent to such a person. After returning, Tommy immediately started looking for another property he could rent from a real estate agent, but it seems no one came forward to rent him a house. Upon returning from the trip, Tommy found that he had no home to return to, and according to the police, he had run out of funds, maxed out his cards. Kristen had terminated her apartment lease as well, leaving them homeless and resorting to sleeping in a park until they were reported.
Anyway, as the person responsible for him, we need to proceed with.
The police thought I had come to pick up Tommy. What? I just came because I was called. I have no intention of being the person responsible for him.
What?
Let them sleep outside together, I said, laughing. Presumptuously, Kristen, hoping I would take responsibility, looked up at me despairingly upon hearing my words. Tommy tried to lunge at me in anger, but was stopped by the police. Yuck, you're dirty. You haven't showered in a while, have you? Don't come near me. I deliberately said that, then turned my gaze to Kristen. She was not particularly beautiful, just an ordinary-looking girl. Now filthy and disheveled, she was probably in her early 20s. She sulked in silence, merely hanging her head. Kristen, was it? She flinched when I addressed her.
Yes.
Why don't you call your parents to pick you up? That is, if you can tell them you went on an affair trip with a married man. Kristen couldn't respond to my words and just started crying profusely. And Tommy, you should have her parents take responsibility for you, though you might be older than her.
What?
Well, I don't think age matters in love, as long as it's true love. Tommy tried to retort, but ended up silent, unable to say anything. What was he thinking, messing around with someone so much younger? Seemingly realizing the shame of his actions, he bit his lip in frustration. Well then, see you.
Wait, please.
Tommy called out loudly, trying to stop me as I began to leave. But I had no obligation to wait. I didn't even look back as I left the police station. The next day, the doorbell at my parents' house rang. Felicia and my mom had gone out shopping, so I answered the door, and to my surprise, it was Susie. Perhaps she took the bus all the way here just to complain to me. True to my expectations, Susie began speaking with her usual nasty expression.
This failure. You didn't even pick up your own husband. What are you doing? You're terrible.
She probably heard about me refusing to take responsibility yesterday. Apparently, Susie had picked him up this morning. Thinking he might have spent the night at the police station, I chuckled, which made Susie turn red with anger.
What are you laughing at? This isn't funny.
However, a question popped into my mind. I mean, you could have just let Tommy and Kristen stay at your place, Susie. It's terrible to blame me without doing what you could yourself.
I wasn't there.
Not there? I asked back, and Susie laughed as if boasting.
Tommy gifted me a spa trip. It was for 5 nights and 6 days. I just got back yesterday. It's a shame such a kind son ended up with you as his wife.
I didn't know when Tommy had gone overseas or how long he had been in the park. But while Tommy was out sleeping in parks, Susie was comfortably enjoying a spa. Though she didn't know it was happening, she wasn't in any position to blame others. Susie was gifted a spa trip by Tommy? That's nice for you. I was forced to retreat to my parents' house because Tommy sold our house without my consent. Who should really be helping Tommy? As I smiled sweetly at her, Susie looked at me as if she'd seen something disgusting and began muttering complaints and excuses.
Anyway, to do such a thing to your own husband, you and your mother will get what's coming to you. That's why no good comes from single mothers and their children.
Enraged, Susie said this in desperation and then left. Was she referring to herself and Tommy as single mothers and their children? Thinking this, I watched Susie hurriedly walk away. A few hours later, Tommy contacted me. Wondering what it was this time, I answered the phone with a sense of dread.
Mom fell and broke her bone on her way back from your house, and now she's hospitalized.
Tommy seemed quite panicked. She said we'd get our comeuppance and broke her bone on her way home. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I've never seen such a perfect boomerang.
What's so funny? Anyway, it's serious, so come back home.
Back to where? I don't have a home, remember?
You can come to my parents' house.
Tommy said it as if it was the most natural thing, but why would he think I'd agree to that? No thanks. Why don't you ask Kristen? I told him, but Tommy's response was sluggish. Probably even Kristen had rejected him. Oh, so your beloved Kristen can't even take care of Susie for you? Well, it's Susie after all. No surprise there. Then you should take care of your mother yourself. On the other end of the phone, Tommy seemed utterly devastated.
Don't say that. We're family, aren't we?
Now he starts talking about family. Perhaps Kristen had dumped him. But that doesn't mean I'm obliged to help. I scoffed at his words and responded, I can't consider someone who wouldn't help me as family, so I won't help either. After that, I told Tommy I wanted a divorce. I thought the process would go smoothly, but surprisingly, Susie opposed our divorce.
If marrying such a woman means breaking up with you, you're better. I won't allow a divorce. Just come back home and I'll forgive you.
She must have been talking about Kristen. Susie had probably realized that Kristen wouldn't be able to fulfill her expectation of a daughter-in-law taking care of her in-laws. Of course, I had no intention of doing that either. And it turned out that Tommy really had broken up with Kristen, so Susie's worries were unfounded. Probably Tommy was the one who got dumped. Kristen must have realized she couldn't be happy with someone like Tommy. But I'm not about to let someone who went after my husband get off scot-free. Of course, I'm going to demand a hefty alimony. For the young Kristen, it would be a large amount, but I demanded $20,000.
I can't pay that kind of money. We broke up. Isn't that enough?
I went to talk to her with a lawyer. She turned pale and whispered weakly. She seemed so timid, it made me wonder why she'd go after someone else's husband. But no matter her personality, I was not going to forgive Kristen. Being cheated on, I was so devastated I wished I could just disappear. But it wasn't just that. While you were having a great time with Tommy, I was suffering from the stress given by Tommy's mother.
But
You not only stole Tommy, but also our family time. I know Tommy is to blame, but if you had a bit more common sense and moral standards, this wouldn't have happened. Kristen was crying when she heard those words. However, her tears seemed less about remorse and more about her anxiety over what happens next. Indeed, she hadn't offered a sincere apology, just repeating, but, looking for a way out. It seems Kristen came from a rural area, and her father is known to be strict. With no home to return to, I think she should go back to the countryside and be reprimanded by her stern father. I've also demanded alimony from Tommy. First, as part of the property settlement, the money from the house sale is to be split. Out of the $200,000, $100,000 should be mine. Tommy's share is also $100,000, of which he has already squandered $20,000 on extravagant travel, leaving him with $80,000. I've decided to have him pay $30,000 as alimony and $50,000 as child support in a lump sum. I chose a lump sum payment for the child support because I wanted to limit any further interactions with Tommy. Tommy has apparently squandered his savings on Kristen, leaving him penniless. During our last conversation, Tommy apologized profusely to me.
I'm really sorry. Let's start over. If that's not possible, at least forgive the alimony or reduce the child support.
While he expresses his apologies, like Kristen, he seemed more self-pitying than remorseful, which made me sigh. Are you kidding? If you understood how much pain I went through, you wouldn't dare ask for alimony forgiveness.
That's, well,
And Felicia is about to enter high school and college, and $50,000 is hardly enough. But I've already reduced the amount because you can't afford to pay more. You should be thankful for that. Tommy was speechless, finally understanding just how pathetic a father and husband he had been.
can I see Felicia anymore?
As he spoke, tears messed up his face. You shouldn't. It's not for me to say, but Felicia doesn't want to.
That's,
Even putting aside the affair, if you had been a wonderful father, Felicia wouldn't feel this way. But you never stood up for Felicia and me against Susie's complaints. Contrasting my laughter, Tommy looked utterly defeated. I remembered what Felicia had said.
Dad is not only useless, but he's making Mom suffer. So just get a divorce already.
Actually, it was Felicia who had suggested the divorce. If I had children, I might have hesitated to divorce, but it was Felicia's words that made me decide. I have a real family with my mother and Felicia, and I felt that was all I needed. When I shared this, Tommy turned pale and just cried silently. Even if he thought his actions were minor, they had a major impact on others. I hope he lives his life, never forgetting the pain he caused and reflecting on his actions. Tommy, having no money to rent a house, started living with Susie in his parents' house. Susie required care due to complications from her fracture, so Tommy worked reduced hours to care for her. Their income drastically decreased, and they had to live a poor life, needing a helper when Tommy was away. Originally, Susie tried to rely on me, and Tommy tried to push her onto me. He probably intended to make me take care of Susie as well. Fortunately, I managed to escape that situation. I imagine caring for Susie with her difficult personality is tough, but that's Tommy's responsibility. I don't know how many decades of caregiving lie ahead, but Tommy has no choice but to do his best. As for Kristen, after impulsively canceling her lease and being unable to pay alimony, she consulted her parents. I received an apology and alimony payment from Kristen's parents, and it seems she has returned to the countryside. Consequently, she resigned from her job. The job she loved, the independent life she longed for, and all her savings, Kristen lost everything. I don't know what she is doing now, but I think she is living under strict parental supervision at her parents' house, feeling restricted. As for myself, I continue to live in my parents' home. Although it was a bit far, Felicia attended her original elementary school until graduation. She then enrolled in the middle school I attended. Seeing my daughter in the same uniform I wore, my mother tearfully expressed her joy. My mother always silently wished for my happiness, and although she never spoke about her feelings, I realized after living together that she must have felt lonely at times. From now on, I plan to do my best to show filial piety and make our family of 3 happy. Most importantly, I want to ensure that my mother and Felicia have a happy life.